Okay, so here's an answer. What I wanted you to display was this: 7 plus 3 equals 20, and here's one way of doing it. As in all programming, there's usually many more ways than one of getting to an answer, but here's one way. I hope that this is the way that you got, because this is building on what we did in a previous video. But what I've done here is right. Doesn't matter if it's right or right line. I'm just in the habit of using right line rather than right, but it really doesn't matter for this example. I've got the contents of a variable followed by a space, followed by a plus, followed by a space, followed by the contents of another variable, followed by a space, followed by an equals, followed by a space, followed by the contents of a third variable. So in the first space we'll go in the number 1, whatever's stored in number 1. In the second space we'll go whatever's stored in number 2, and in the third space whatever the total is when we've added number 1 to number 2, that will go in this here. So when I run this, what I get is 7, that's what's in number 1, then the plus whatever's in number 2, which is 13. I add them together and display the answer. So hopefully you got something like that. You might have got a series of right lines, that's fine. The important thing in programming isn't really how you get there. If you go on to do computer science, you go on to be a developer, it's good to have nice code. At this stage, the most important thing is that it works and something comes out. How you've got to the answer isn't as important as the fact that you do have an answer. So if you've just done a series of right lines or rights, doesn't matter, don't worry about that. Okay, another way of doing this, just to demonstrate something else, is to have a total variable. So let's say instead of doing the calculation here, I do it here. So number 1 has 7, number 2 has 13. And now I'm going to say that total is going to get the value of, remember that's what it means, so the variable total, which is an integer, gets a value of, and I can add two variables together and store the value in another variable. So this will do the calculation of number 1 plus number 2 and store it in total. So down here, the last one won't be the calculation, it would be the contents of the variable total, because that now has number 1 plus number 2 stored in it. So if I run this, I shouldn't see any different, it should be the same, and it is. 7 plus 13 equals 20. So that just shows that you can add up, you can do something to variables and store the result in another variable. Okay, so hopefully you've got that. Let's do some other things you can do. You could do some singles to show. So let's say number 1 equals 56.5 and number 2 equals 12.8. Any idea what those two are divided? Well, let's find out. Number 1 divided by number 2. I shouldn't have deleted that console before. What was it? Divide. And number 1, comma, number 2, comma, total. Right, let's see what that does. There we go. So 56.5 divided by 12.7 is 4.448819. There you go. So there's an example of using singles. It is important in computing to remember, if you want to add, it's the add symbol. If you want to minus, take away. Everyone knows what take away means. If you want to divide, it's the divide. And if you want to multiply, it's the asterisk. So you need to remember that these keys are, or these symbols are what we use. Make that a bit clearer. They're all around the corner of or right hand corner of your keyboard on the number pad. So if you look on your number pad on the right hand side of the keyboard, you'll see going around the corner there's the divide, the star the minus and the add. So that's where you can find them. You can also use them along your normal keyboard, but you have to use a shift to get them. So here we're doing a divide. Let's do a multiplication. Oops, I didn't want to do that. Let's go back and do a multiplication. Oh, I didn't want to do that. There we go. Let's do a multiplication. And there we have a multiplication. Now it's important, so I've changed it here, and this is the maths. This is where the maths is happening. That's where the maths is happening. Here, this is just a bit of text. I could put anything here. I could put banana. It's not going to make any difference to the result, because this line is doing the maths. That's where the maths is happening. This red, that's just displaying anything I want to the screen. I could say anything. 56.5 banana, 12.0. That's meaningless nonsense. But because I've done the maths here, number 1 times number 2 is coming up with the answer of 717.55. Now that works with integers as well, of course. You can do all of those, the basic arithmetic. You can do a lot of more complex maths, but we'll come to that as we get to it, as we need it. So at the moment, what you can do, you can create variables. You can create variables for text, which is string, whole numbers, which is integer, decimal numbers, which is single, and Boolean values, which is Boolean. You can also display text to the screen, but you can also include variable values in that text and display it to the screen. So we're making good progress here. The next thing we're going to look at is getting input from the user, storing that in a variable and using that in some way. So make sure you've had a practice with this. Some of the early programming exercises in the booklet you've got are about just this kind of stuff, so you can go and have a look at those. Have a good go. The more you experiment and the more you practice, the better you will get and the easier this will be. So do make sure you have a go at that.